IELTS Listening, version 53834. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1 on page 2 of your question booklet. Part 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between a man who wants to book some accommodation at a holiday park and a woman who works at the park. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning, a Hopi holiday park.
Oh, hello. We're planning on coming to a Hopi for a couple of weeks during the summer holidays, and some friends of mine recommended your holiday park, particularly the wooden cabins you have.
That's good to hear. Well, we have different types of cabin available.
Can you tell me about the most basic type?
Yes, we have a couple of cabins still available which are right beside the pool.
That sounds great.
Yes, they are in a good spot. They have one main living area and there's another room with the beds. If you want to do any cooking, there's a communal kitchen that everyone uses, but otherwise the kitchen in the cabin just has a fridge, a small one, and also a microwave for heating things up.
I see. And what's the cost of that?
That's $35 per night.
Okay. And what other types of cabin do you have?
Right, we have our standard cabins. These are near reception, so that's handy if you want to come in and get us to book a trip or anything. The kitchen is fully equipped too, so you can do all your cooking there.
What other facilities does it have? Is there a television?
In the standard cabin, I'm afraid not. But it has a shower, which you don't get in the basic cabin.
Okay.
And that's $55 a night inclusive.
And is there another cabin type?
Yes, the Standard Plus. All of these cabins are directly opposite the lake, and they all come with a private spa as well.
Sounds good.
I should tell you that these cabins are quite popular, so I'd advise you to book as soon as possible.
I don't suppose there's a discount for booking for a longer period.
There is, actually, for the Standard Plus. Once you go up to 5 nights, there's a 15% discount, and anything more than 10 nights, it's 18%.
I'll give it some thought. I think we'll probably go for the standard.
All right.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
So for children, what kind of activities can they do at the holiday park? Do you have a trampoline or anything?
No, but a lot of the kids who come here do tennis. It costs nothing to use our court, and they can come borrow the rackets from us, as long as they bring them back, of course.
Great. My kids would be into that. And we're planning to bring our boat with us and get out on the water. Is it possible for an afternoon or something to hire some equipment? We're hoping to go fishing, but we don't have our own stuff.
Yes, for a small charge we can let you have some equipment.
Fantastic. Is there anything else for kids to do in the Ahopi area?
Well, on Saturday or Sunday, you might like to go to the farm. It's only a short drive from the holiday park. You can go riding there and see how everything works. It's quite a popular thing to do.
OK, I'll just make a note of that.
Actually, one thing I would recommend, depending on whether your children don't mind a late night,
I'm sure they wouldn't.
well, it's a guided tour, $20 for a family, every evening, and you go along with the guide into the forest. That's when the native birds wake up, and it's a great chance to see them in their natural habitat.
My daughter would love that. Now, I just want to check all this with my wife. Will you still be there in 30 minutes?
No, I'm going on my lunch break, but I'll pass your details on to someone else who can confirm your reservation. Her name's Arataki. That's Arataki.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2. You will hear a radio talk on horse riding for disabled people. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
This week, our slot is A Life in the Day of Joan Gilbert, local organiser for Riding for the Disabled. Joan, would you like to tell us about this?
Well, I always have the very best intentions of starting the day at 5:30 to give the horses a really good muck out. But reality intervenes and I finally wake at about 6:30. That probably still sounds very early to you, but for a farm worker, which is what my son is at the moment, that's cutting things pretty fine. Once I've managed to get him safely on his way, at about 7 a.m., I can start turning my attention to the other important tasks of the day. For about 5 years, we've been taking overseas students from the International Centre at our local college, and I have to give them a proper breakfast. Most of our students used to be from the Middle East, but they're no longer coming, so we tend to have Malaysian girls, and they like to have a cooked breakfast, much more than any Europeans we've had, including me, and I don't have anything these days. After cooking, I finally get round to the poor horses. It's only after this that I can start thinking about what I regard as my most important task: work for Riding for the Disabled. I've been involved with this organisation, on and off, for over 20 years, but I've only recently taken on the job of chairperson. Most of the work seems more secretarial, but that's how charities get organised. In our immediate district, we have had as many as 30 riders, but currently we've only got 22. The number of helpers who have volunteered is actually 40, but we can rely on 25 to come regularly to help in the different groups. We now have 4 separate groups which cater for disabled children and adults from 6 to 40 years old.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
As I say, I feel that although I no longer have any proper full-time paid employment, I do have a full and busy life. I'm a housewife, which I don't mind because I don't really object to doing things like washing and cooking. Then there's my own horses, which I adore. Even the revolting stuff like cleaning out the stables. The official RDA stuff is a mixed bag, really. I don't have major problems with all the letter writing and correspondence which it entails, but like lots of shy people, I find the fundraising horrendous. Other regular RDA duties, such as ringing round the riders to fix times, etc., is one of the pleasantest aspects of the work. After all, that's why I'm involved with charity work, the contact with people. My working day ends with the least enjoyable job of all, sorting the accounts. I got involved with RDA because I've always loved horses, and I can see disabled people gaining so much. I know all the medical evidence that shows that it does wonders for muscle building and so on, which is important. But from talking to the riders, they say it is the confidence they gain, and also the opportunity to be part of a new and exciting environment, which gives them the greatest benefit. In terms of the RDA organisation itself, I feel it works very well, but we're always striving to make it better. I wish, for example, our helpers and the organisers in the various centres could really rationalise the fundraising efforts, which sometimes are very inefficient. And it also saddens me how unaware some of the stables can be about the difficulties faced by people who are disabled. Anyway, I feel very privileged to work with our riders and to see such tangible benefits. It sends me to sleep with the feeling that though the day has been hard, it has been worthwhile.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 45 seconds to check your answers to Part 2. Part 3. You will hear a student called Ravi talking to his tutor, Dr. Chang, about research he is doing for an assignment on children playing outdoors. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Right, Ravi. Tell me how the research for your assignment about children's outdoor play is going.
Yes, well, I've been reading about why children spend less time playing outside now than 20 or 30 years ago.
So is it just because of the amount of online time that children have now, which obviously happens indoors?
Well, if that was the case, there'd be a correlation between high internet use and low levels of outdoor play. And it's nothing to do with whether there are adequate facilities outside, playgrounds, for example, as any open space will do. There's perhaps no single more important factor than parental worries about the dangers of vehicles on the streets.
But it could also be that children today prefer playing indoors to outdoors?
Well, a study in Tokyo suggests it's the other way round. But children are spending more time in structured activities and out-of-school clubs than before. And this has a knock-on effect on...
What's left for outdoor play?
Right.
Your premise is that outdoor play is good. What exactly do you want to focus on in your assignment?
Well, not so much on things that apply to exercise in general, like children's muscles getting stronger because they run around, and not on what seems, for instance, self-evident, that outdoor play helps children to concentrate on things other than lessons.
Sure.
I'd like to investigate some of the more unexpected benefits, like to children's digestion. This is because fresh air tends to stimulate hunger. Perhaps leaving to one side the question of whether climbing trees helps educate children about the natural world.
No, not really relevant. What sort of decisions do outdoor games and activities force children to make?
Well, for example, how they decide how dangerous something might be. And I'd like to outline the main findings on that.
Okay. And as you're arguing that there's been a shift in play patterns over the last generation or so, how are you going to substantiate this?
Yes. Surveys have compared parents' recollections of their childhood play 30 years ago with what their children do now. And the nature of what children do when they are playing outdoors has changed.
How exactly?
Well, surprisingly, it's not so much how often children play outside or preferences for large or small groups, but the fact that the play sessions don't go on for as long. And games involving one child running after another who tries to get away, these are still as popular as ever. But one thing that has declined is improvised games, and I'd like to examine why this might be.
Interesting. And what about safety?
Well, from my reading, serious accidents are still rare. More kids hurt themselves falling out of bed than out of trees.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
I think the decline of outdoor play is a problem, which should worry parents. I mean, perhaps the children themselves don't miss it. They may be happy to spend lots of time indoors. But the links between inactivity and physical problems when they're adults are so well established that I think kids should be encouraged to spend more time outdoors with their brothers and sisters and friends.
What about schools?
Well, what I think they should do differently regarding outdoor play, and it wouldn't actually require a great deal of expenditure, is base their policy on different outcomes, like developing children's confidence, not just thinking about exam results. Although I don't know how it would go down with the parents.
And do children get more contact with nature in rural areas?
There's research on this by Smith and Barker. Intuitively, you'd expect children in rural areas to spend more time out in the open, but in fact, they are generally told to keep off agricultural land. Plus, there are difficulties with supervision outside towns and cities.
Right. And Smith and Barker's paper was published in
2001.
Not the most up-to-date, but still valid to use. But you'll need to stipulate very precisely that their focus was, if I remember correctly, just on rural areas. So you'd need to consider how far their restricted findings might be applicable to urban areas as well.
Okay.
Right. So now I'd suggest you produce an overview of what you're going to cover.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
Part 4. You will hear a student who is studying energy technology reporting on a field trial of heat pumps. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I'm going to talk about a field trial that was carried out on heat pumps. But first, some background. The UK has adopted a very ambitious target for reducing carbon emissions. 27% of British carbon dioxide emissions come from the energy used in homes, so around a quarter of all reductions must also come from that sector rather than industry. So it's not surprising that the government, private companies and independent agencies have been looking into green energy alternatives. At present, the most popular green energy, from a range which includes wind, biomass heating and ground heat, is solar. This has been the most readily accepted by the public. However, the field trial I've looked at researched heat pump technology. Heat pump technology is relatively new to the UK market, and because there is such limited experience of this technology, people have been reluctant to invest in it. So, a field trial was needed to monitor this in a sample of heat pumps in real situations. The heat pumps in this trial are used for the same reason you'd use a boiler, but rather than burning a fuel to produce heat, they move heat from a low-temperature heat source and pump it to a higher temperature where it can be used to provide central heating or domestic hot water. Most heat pumps take heat from either the ground or the air, but water from ponds or rivers may occasionally be used. The general advice in the UK is that the temperature of the hot water stored in a cylinder should be periodically put up to 60 degrees centigrade to kill off bacteria. It is sometimes necessary to use an electric immersion heater to achieve this temperature, as most heat pump installations will be designed to produce domestic hot water at temperatures between 50 and 55 degrees centigrade. For this field trial, 83 UK sites were monitored, and they provided a wide spectrum of performance results, even in installations that seemed similar. Some installations performed as well as heat pumps studied in European field trials, but many failed to meet these levels. This field trial monitored two central heating systems, radiators and the increasingly popular underfloor systems. The observations of the field trial led to some key conclusions. One was that heat pumps are sensitive pieces of equipment. In some of the early installations, there were problems because the engineers hadn't fitted the heat pump correctly. This observation emphasises the need for better training for everyone involved in the installation. Many different systems were monitored in the field trial, and it was found that in most cases, designs which were simple were more efficient. So this is something which both pump manufacturers and installers should bear in mind. Many customers mistakenly came to the conclusion that their system wasn't working as well as they'd expected. However, when this was further investigated, it was found that they had not realised how to regulate the controls properly. There had been a failure to explain this in sufficient detail to the householders. And it was often the case that for the installation, all sorts of workmen might be involved. For example, a groundworks contractor, a plumber, a heat pump installer, and an electrician. It was obvious that a supervisor should be appointed to oversee and be responsible for the whole installation. So, what are the implications of this technology on a wider environment?
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4.
That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.